Hi, this is Lee from the Law School Toolbox and the Bar Exam Toolbox. Today we're excited to have Chris Fromm joining us from Themis Bar Review to talk about all things multiple choice. We would like to take a moment to thank Themis Bar Review for sponsoring this podcast. If you're a 3L nearing the law school finish line and gearing up to become a licensed attorney, you should be thinking about bar prep. That's why I'm excited to share an exclusive promotion from Themis Bar Review for students taking a 2026 bar exam. Themis courses are designed to help you effectively prepare for the bar exam with comprehensive materials like 15 to 20-minute lecture videos, targeted outlines, and practice questions tailored to your jurisdiction's requirements. And here's the best part. You create your study calendar on your own terms. Using Themis' dynamic study planner, you can start when you're ready and choose which days and hours fit into your schedule. The adaptive calendar will keep you on track, so even if you miss a day or two, the calendar will recalibrate, helping you finish your coursework and feel fully prepared on test day. Themis' course will give you everything you need to learn and the confidence to succeed on the bar exam. With this special promotion, you can save $1,000 on any 2026 Themis Bar Review course using the code BAREXAMTB1000 at checkout. That's BAREXAMTB1000, valid through December 1st, 2025. Don't miss out on this opportunity. Start your bar prep journey with Themis today. Welcome back to the Bar Exam Toolbox. Today we are excited to have Chris Fromm from Themis Bar Review. He is their National Director of Curriculum and Assessment, joining us today to talk about all things multiple choice, MBE, NextGen, you name it. We'll talk about multiple choice. So Chris, thank you for taking time to visit with us and chat about this topic that is very stress-inducing for a lot of folks.
Absolutely. Glad to be here. And it is. I think the first thing you have to do is figure out a way to quell that anxiety. And especially with NextGen coming, you may have a lot of students, you may have a lot of faculty who are like, how do I teach this? How do I learn this? And I think that thinking about what the NextGen exam is pivoting to test is like really important to reducing that anxiety. Because I think that in years past, it was really not a test of pure memorization, but you had to memorize so much law, right? And you have some folks that are great at that, right? Their mind is wired that way. Then you have a lot of folks whose minds aren't wired that way. Or you have, hey, I'm 52, right? And your memory is a perishable skill, right? And I think some of our older test takers are worried, I just can't memorize all that. And then the ultimate, why is like, no judge is ever going to say, from memory, don't you dare open that code book, right? So I like that the NextGen is kind of moving into kind of a more boxed in approach where they're identifying what skills students need to be able to have mastered, but then also really defining the scope of the content of the law. So I think that reduces anxiety from a exam standpoint, but there's still 120 multiple choice questions, right, on the NextGen, which is a minor, but we got to acknowledge it is a reduction from the 200. And I think folks that, attrition becomes a problem where they just can't do 100 questions, take a lunch break, and then do 100. This kind of 40, 40, 40, this graduated approach seems to be a little bit easier. I mean, easy is a funny word, but I kind of jumped off talking about the anxiety of it all. And I think that whether it be 200 or 120, the anxiety-inducing pieces, I don't know how to start. I don't know where to start. And if all you do is start top left and start reading a multiple choice question, I think you've already started the wrong way. Now, eventually, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, let's pause there for a second, because I think to anchor everybody who's listening, coming up, starting in the summer of 2026, we're going to have some bar takers taking this NextGen exam, which is going to have these MBE style questions with a few little tweaks. We'll talk about the tweaks in a minute. And then you're going to have still a large portion of students taking this traditional MBE. So, but regardless, everybody's taking something. And most of them are going to have 4 answer choices. So with kind of this advice of how you kind of think about it and approach a question and get started, this applies to both tests. I just wanted everyone to really appreciate this, that no matter which one of these tests you're taking, in the summertime or as the transition rolls out, you need to think about how to start. So you're anxious, you're on your screen. If you're on the NextGen, you're looking at the paper. If you're taking the UBE and you're like, oh, what do I do? So I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah. For me, it's always starting with the call to question, right? Just like if my boss comes in and gives me an assignment, like that's more important to me first. I want to get my marching orders down. And bar takers, regardless of what bar, are going to have so much law in their head. And they're going to be like a pressurized fire hose holding firefighter, just looking to dump as much law as they can. But you got to be able to figure out what law is needed, what subjects is being tested. And you like sometimes a call will say, how should the court rule? And you're like, great, that doesn't help me at all. But generally, the call is going to give you A has been arrested for murder. Or it will tell you Joe brings a motion to suppress, or the plaintiff, it's not going to say Joe anymore, right? Because we've gotten away from like proper nouns, but the plaintiff brings a motion for judgment as a matter of law. There's going to be something in that call that grounds you in the subject. And that's really important because if, I don't know, you're looking for grated Parmesan cheese and you go to the grocery store, you want to find the section where that's going to be found, because if not, you're going to be wasting a lot of time. And whether it's 200 multiple choice questions or 120, efficiency in the process is really important. So we start with the call, figure out the subject, and now we're going through the fact pattern, thinking about what words are jumping out that are important that go to that particular subject. And I think as you're going through that, the issue becomes clear to you. Issue spotting is so important. It's a foundation for multiple choice. It's also a foundation for if you're writing essays or if you're doing some kind of performance test, right? Whether it be the current bar exam, whether it be NextGen, you're still going to have to be able to spot the issue. And then comes the law, right? I think so many times students want to just dump out that law first, but you have to figure out what law goes to your issue. And then I think last, it's once you've figured out, let's say it's an intentional tort, let's say it's false imprisonment, right? You have to then think, okay, what are the elements of false imprisonment? And then go into your fact pattern and find, where are the commensurate facts that go with those elements? It's like a recipe, I need 2 pounds of potatoes. Here's my potatoes. I need carrots. Here's my carrots. Like, I think it could be just that simple. If I got all my ingredients, if the facts match up to my elements, bam, my cause of action, my crime, my tort, it's made out. I'm looking for a yes. If I'm missing one, it's not made out. I'm looking for a no. And I'm looking for a yes or a no, that's your gut. That's your predictive outcome, right? Which way are you leaning? Rather than have this absolute answer you're looking for. And I say that because so many times we are consumers and we want this to be there. What happens if it's not there? So instead of looking for the right answer, of which there are currently 200, right? Look to get rid of 600 wrong answers, because that's what you're going to have to, from a skill perspective, do more than anything else. No, no, no. It's not wrong. I don't love it, but it's not wrong. Therefore, it's my correct answer. Like, that is the antithesis of how we live our lives, right? Like, what's the least best thing here? Like, we don't think about it that way. It's like, what do I want? Boom, and you just go and get it. So I think that the process of elimination works if you have a predictive outcome. Which way are you leaning? And again, students oftentimes change their answer from a yes to a no, and it's usually to their detriment. So one thing I like to ask students is, why did you do that? If you can't articulate why you're changing it, then don't change it, right? But that's an approach, which should give you a little bit more confidence. It should give you a little bit more speed. The process is more efficient, and it should also allay some anxiety. I know how to start. But I think more in depth, more specifically, there are certain subjects that lend themselves to this approach. And I call it like a bucket approach. If you get a torts question, let's say, there are 3 buckets in my mind in torts: intentional torts, negligence, and strict liability. As soon as you see this is a strict liability action, get in that bucket and stay in that bucket. As soon as you see this is intentional torts, like the word reasonable in an answer choice, which goes with torts, but more specifically negligence, is probably a wrong answer, right? Because you have all of this law. If you can't compartmentalize it, it's kind of like when you put together a puzzle. What do? Oh, it's got, it's got a blue sky and it's got a green field down below. You start to separate out the blue pieces and the green pieces. Start to put your tort, your question, into one of those buckets. I think that's a good approach in torts. Criminal law, specific intent crime, or general intent crime. What bucket does it go into? What are the elements that I need for that? What are the defenses that go along with that tort, that crime? And then, second level, what are not the elements? What are not the defenses? Because then they become wrong answers to avoid. Like contracts is another one, for example. Is this UCC or is this common law? I think there's a lot of kind of secondary bucketing, right? That really allows you to narrow your focus. The fewer tools you need on your desk, the more manageable the process is. If you just dumped all of that law out there, that's the anxiety building piece, right? Because you're constantly separating all of this stuff out. So I'm a big fan of kind of that bucketing approach. And let me say one more thing. Some people have mnemonics that make sense. Other people have mnemonics that only make sense to them. So I think forcing mnemonics, obviously learning science tells us that that's a way to learn, but I think it needs to work for you. Some people, just mnemonics don't work for them. They need a mnemonic to remember the mnemonic, and then they're wasting time. But I have a mnemonic that I like to use in our teaching, and that doesn't help me remember law, but rather it helps me across all subjects. And it's IKEA. IKEEAA. And think about this. The I is intent. As you're reading a fact pattern and they tell you what somebody intends or what they don't, that's an important thing to circle. I don't care what the subject is, but intent or lack thereof is an important legal concept, right? K, knowledge. What does somebody know? What don't they know? Maybe that goes to assumption of risk, right? Two E's, education. The more you have, maybe the higher that standard of care might be. The less education you have, that might be a trap, because it's like Jimmy, 21 years old, who doesn't have a high school diploma. Well, I don't want to catch feelings for Jimmy, right? Ever. But at the same time, Jimmy's an adult. So his education level is now irrelevant, right? The other E then would be experience. The more experience somebody has, the less experience they have, important concepts. And then two A's, awareness. What is somebody aware of? And a favorite bar word is unbeknownst, right? Unbeknownst. What is somebody unaware of? That might go to torts. It may go to crimes, contracts. There's so many places that comes up. And then the last A, age. Evidence. Can this kid appreciate telling the truth? Criminal law. Can we put a minor to death? Contracts. Can a minor enter into a contract? It's a factor of discrimination in con law. I mean, almost every subject, age is relevant. But that mnemonic, IKEA, I think is really good from a skill perspective of what words are important in the fact pattern. Because I know you've seen students highlight the entire fact pattern. And it's like, okay, what was important? Well, everything was. No, everything can't be important, right? So, well, how do I find the things that are important? I think IKEA is a really good way of approaching any multiple choice question. And then obviously, if you know the subject, you can get a little bit more granular. But these are the kinds of things that I'm teasing out as I'm reading a multiple choice question. They're also the types of things that I'm going to use in my analysis as well. So I think that mnemonic is an important one to kind of keep in mind. And again, the more of these tricks and tools you have, that anxiety should be, reduced.
Right, because we know novelty is one of the anxiety-inducing things, especially around a test. And so the more of these that you have practiced, the less novelty you will see. I was speaking to a student this morning about the MBE, and we were talking about the importance of practice, which I think UWorld, is a great tool that's very popular with students to do a lot of this practice. I think folks underestimate how much of that practice they're supposed to do, but it is very important. But then I often hear folks just saying like, well, I just did the practice, almost like it like washed over them. They're just like clicking the answer and they're not maybe working UWorld really to the maximum of their advantage. So, what would you say to that student who's like, well, I did some questions, maybe I didn't do enough. I checked whether I got the right answer, but like, why didn't my score go up?
Yeah, and I think, there's this quality versus quantity debate that we need to have, right? And in speaking to a number of my colleagues, at Themis, but even, just across all bar review and academic support communities, there's this arc of questions, right? This number of questions. And I think most people say around 1,600 to 2,000. So let's call it 1,800 questions, right? You need to get better as you get up to 1,800, because if you get to 1,800 and you're around 62, 63%, you're probably where you need to be. Better than that, great. But if you get to 1,600 and you're still at 50%, you can do 5,000 questions. That bar will go out this way, but it won't ever increase. And people say, well, what accounts for that? I think what you have to do is not, if you're a prize fighter and you get punched in the face, you kind of watch and see, where did that punch come from? Because I don't want to get hit by that thing again. I think you have to watch the videotape, right? You need to see, why did you get this wrong? Because if you can't figure out why you got it wrong, when it matters more on the bar, you're going to continue to miss it. It's not only going to hurt your score, it's going to hurt your confidence. And, let's say that day one was the essays currently, right? And you feel pretty good after day one, but now you're like, oh, I'm terrible at multiple choice. So now the entire second half of the game, right? You're already feeling defeated, which is a terrible place to be. So I think feeling good about doing multiple choice questions is important, but you got to do the questions, but more than just doing the questions, reviewing the questions. Why did you get it wrong? And Lee, I teach at 6 different schools, both semesters, and most of it's, via Zoom anymore. COVID was good to me in that sense because I used to fly to schools and I was in the air all the time. And I think some professors took to Zoom better than others, but I had been teaching online already. So I think Zoom just kind of came natural in my classes, and I've maintained that. But I talk about teaching my classes because I think skill first is really important rather than just doing 2,000 questions. It's learning the right way to do the questions. And so I force all of my students to have 2 things. One, a stack of blank note cards. If we're in class and someone talked about firm offer and you didn't know what that was, write down firm offer on the front of that card. Later on, fill in the definition on the back. Now, I know there's probably 1,000 places where you can get that flashcard that you can buy it, but I think there's the benefit in writing it down. There's some muscle memory there, right? Between you struggling to find the answer or the definition and you writing it, that it stays with you. And then, as a kind of follow up to class, go touch grass. I mean, that's I think the new phrase that everybody's using, right? Get away from your screen for a little bit. But bar takers specifically are going to say, I don't have time for that. Well, I think if you're efficient in your use of time, you absolutely do, because it's going to help you feel better, reduce anxiety. But then it's also reviewing those flashcards. That's that spaced repetition that learning science tells us is really important. But then the beauty is that stack of things you didn't know grew. But over time, as you start to review it, that stack gets smaller and you kind of show yourself, yeah, I know this stuff. And the second thing I call it my book of shame, right? Where I knew a rule of law, but I misapplied it. Well, I mean, looking at the note card isn't going to help because I knew the rule. I misapplied it. So then I take and I write down a single sentence like, oh, don't forget, it has to be a signed writing by a merchant. This was oral. Like, why specifically, subjectively, did you miss that one? And again, like your note cards, review those book of shame entries and kind of it's it's the lump sum. It represents the things that you missed. And if you're staring down your fears, then I think again that anxiety should come down. And we've talked a lot about anxiety without really talking about anxiety, but I think that upwards to a third of my students have some neurodivergence. From a learning perspective, that's really important for us to meet our students where they are. So knowing more about our students and figuring out, I've been looking a lot at books and articles about ADHD and how to kind of better, approach subjects and topics. And frankly, whatever works for a neurodivergent student is absolutely going to work for your, student who doesn't have some kind of neurodivergence. So I think it's a really important thing to talk about anxiety reducing exercises, smaller bites, right? Like, hey, do duty and then review it, review some questions rather than do negligence and review some questions, because that's 4 or 5 hours of videotape. Where did, the lecturer lose the audience? I think if you take these kind of small intentional steps, it builds a lot easier.
Yeah, and I think I'm a big proponent of what I call high impact studying. And I think that around the MBE, which most people do not enjoy studying, I didn't when I was studying for
Yeah.
the MBE, and I tutored for the SAT. But it can be boring. It can be a little mind numbing. You can
Oh,
just
yeah.
feel like it's a slog, And so this idea, somebody's listening to us talk and it's like 1,600 questions. I don't want to do 1,600
Yeah.
questions. I mean, I hear that, but I think that one of the mistakes that is being made right now is working under distracted conditions and not making the most of your study time. You're talking about that your feet need to hit the grass. I 100% agree. I mean, the neuroscience shows us that if we don't go and let our mind wander, if we don't take breaks, our brains can't even consolidate what we've been studying. So it's like, it is pointless to study all day if you do not give your mind time to process what you've been learning. But I also think that when you're doing this heavy lifting, for most students who do not like the MBE, who find it stressful, boring, frustrating, whatever, if you are doing a couple MBE questions and then checking your phone because you want a dopamine hit because it's going to make you feel better, you're going to lose significant time and focus. I mean, I'm reading studies that are saying every time we task switch, we can lose up to 23 minutes of productivity. I mean, that's a lot of studying. Like, I don't want to have to study more for these tests. Your goal is to study as little as possible to get the results that you need. And so I think that that's part of it too, especially if you're an anxious student. I think, not only do we have students with with neurodivergence and ADHD and things like that, but most of us have some sort of attention issues in our modern life. We all need to be better about this. You have to be able to have the best version of your brain. I think that's something that, if you're really struggling sitting down to do this work, you have to look at this big picture about when are you taking breaks? How long are you focusing? Can you turn your phone off for 50 minutes? Can you do, like a set of those questions? If not 50, can you do it for 30? And if you can't turn off your phone for 30 minutes, then I think that's a bigger question trying to accomplish something like this.
Yeah. And, time blindness gets us
Mm-hmm.
all, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm 10 minutes early for, a doctor's appointment. So I'm just going to sit in the car and look at something. And then it's like, oh my gosh, I'm late. Like, how did that happen? Right.
Mm-hmm.
I, I take it upon myself because I don't think there's a class in high school, in college, in law school that helps students with their executive functioning skills. Right.
There's
But
maybe should be, but there
yeah,
isn't.
absolutely right. And, bar review bottlenecks around week 3 or 4. Week 1, you're all on board, you're running downhill, you're feeling good because you got all this energy, you're in contracts, and then it switches to property, and maybe you're still in it, and then here comes torts, and you're like, uh-oh, I'm now behind by a day or two. I'm behind by a couple hours. And then it gets worse and worse and worse, and it spirals out of control. And then you start thinking, okay, what do I need to cut out? What do I just give up on? I'm not 1,600 multiple choice questions. I can't do those anymore. So what I'm asking my students to do is make a to-do list, like I think we all do. But the problem with a to-do list is, or what's missing is, there's no immediacy to anything, right? You just have these things that you need to do. They're not necessarily in an order, right? They're just kind of all there to remind us that we need to check that box at some point. But then more importantly, we don't know how many hours each one of those things is going to take. So get it off your to-do list and put it onto your calendar. I will say, hey, next week we're moving into hearsay. There's a lot of video to watch, right? There's, 2.5 hours. So maybe break that up on, if class is on Thursday, do a half hour on Monday. Tuesdays is a day off. Maybe do an hour chunk there. Because what's going to happen if they don't is Wednesday night, they're trying to cram 2.5 hours of hearsay in, and it's just not going to work, right? And I think that is a big, important step for students to start to manage their own calendar like that, because frankly, when they get into practice, that's going to be the expectation, right?
Yeah.
But the 1,600, it does sound daunting. And I was trying to do a little bit of math here, but like it's a 10-week program, basically. So that's 160 questions a week. If you're only doing questions 5 days a week, that's like 30 some questions
It's
a
not
day.
that many questions.
That doesn't sound bad, right? But when you just hear 1,600, you kind of say, nope, can't do it. But breaking things down into those smaller steps, I think makes it more palatable, right? We're like, okay, that's doable. And I think that's one thing that Themis has really done a good job of, is every assignment tells you how long this is going to take. And you can then kind of say, I want a 6-hour day or I want an 8-hour day. I guess you could tweak it to a 10-hour day, but like a 10-hour day, just because you're at work for 10 hours as a lawyer doesn't mean you're billing for 10 hours.
Yeah.
So I think that, treat it like a job, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. I love using weekends to get caught up. And frankly, students are like, oh, I want my weekends off. It's like, you say that now, but when you get into bar review, you're going to want assignments on the weekends because your friends are going to be doing assignments on the weekends. And then you're going to feel that you're falling behind, right? So I think you need that flexibility, but you also need some guide rails, because we've been there. We've done that. These students have no experience with the rigors that the bar cycle holds. And I find in my classes, it's incumbent upon me to kind of pull the curtain back a little bit and say, hey, this is going to hurt. Unless you go into it kind of thoughtfully with some intentionality around your schedule and take into account all the other factors in your life. Are you a caregiver? Are you working? Right? What things can you unload, put on somebody else's plate, hit pause on? What things are absolutes that are on your plate? Account for them. Because if you don't, you're going to be, 20% behind and thinking, okay, what can I, a car rolling down the road going too slow, what can I throw out the window to make me faster? Yeah, there are certain things like, maybe, a speaker or a back seat if you don't have somebody there. But like when you start throwing tires and parts of an engine out the window, there's problems, right?
Yeah. I think that's such a great point. Asking for help and setting yourself for success is so important. And making very specific asks, that's always my favorite thing. I learned that from a friend of mine who kind of works in hospitals and doing crisis management and helps families. And when she had a crisis and her husband got in a motorcycle accident, luckily he was okay. But she sent this email and she's like, I need support. And here are the 10 things that I need. Who would like to sign up to do these things? And so then we all wrote back and I was like, I will drop off dinner and I will pick up your daughter. And and then we were like, she had a whole thing set up because she was very specific. And I think that that is something I know. It's like, I now have adopted this in my whole life. Like anytime you need help, it's our responsibility, if we can, to ask for specific help. And I think bar time is a great time to exercise that skill. It's like, if you have a dog and you need to be out of the house all day, like ask somebody else if they can walk your dog. because that's like that. And somebody will probably be willing, or even ask somebody to help you create a schedule for people to walk their dog. Like somebody create a Google Calendar about the dog walking. People want to show up for you if you give them the opportunity to, but you have to be direct and realize that that is also important. With all those personal distractions and exhaustion, it's going to make it harder for you to show up.
Swallow that pride, right? Swallow that
Yeah.
pride. Ask for help.
I don't even think it's pride. It is just about like being a human and just being like honest and just allowing people want to help. People who care about you want to help. And I remember when I was studying for the bar, it was a summer in the Bay Area, which for those who have never done a summer in San Francisco, it is very gray and very dark and a little sad. And so my best friend was like, what do you need? She wasn't in school. She's like, what do you need? And I was like, I need you to take me to Sunshine on Saturday because I need you to pick me up from my apartment and drive me into the Sunshine. And that's what she would do. She would pick me up, and she always had like cookies in the car because she used to bake cookies all the time. And she would have like chocolate chip cookies, and she would drive me north of the Golden Gate until we found sun, and we would go hiking and do something else because I wouldn't have done that on my own. I was not going to take myself hiking somewhere, but if she showed up and put me in her car, she could drive me somewhere. And I think there's a lot of value in that. Yeah, there's total value in that.
For sure.
Yeah.
And it's good to have that like knowing network around you, because I think that a lot of students aren't preparing the people around them for what they're going to be experiencing in the summer, right? So it is nice to have somebody who's kind of untethered from you, who can literally just like drive you to the Sunshine with some cookies.
Right.
But I try to give students advice. Themis has a lot of live opportunities to touch students online, right? And I will come on, and the first thing I want to tell them is, I'm giving you permission to be selfish, right? Because you got one chance to take the bar the first time. You got to be selfish. If you can put it on somebody else's plate, do it. Don't feel bad about it, right? And I think they need to hear that sometimes, because they want to be these tough little troopers and try to manage everything. And then all of a sudden you're balancing 10 plates and you can't take that next step. And what do? I can't drop something now.
Yeah. I mean, I've told this story on the podcast before, but when I was studying for the bar, I had been with my now husband for about a year, and my parents are both lawyers, and he is not a lawyer. It doesn't have lawyers in his family. And my parents came to visit, and my parents like took him out and sat him down, and they were basically like, you can't break up with her over the summer. They were like, we don't know where this relationship is going. This will be a challenging period of time. And no matter what, you cannot break up with her. You can break up with her in August, but you cannot break up with her between now and July. And he was like, I don't understand what you're talking about. He was very offended by it. But they're like, we're just setting a very clear expectation that this is your responsibility to just hang in there for the next 10 weeks. And then you can decide what to do.
That's funny.
But it was very honest, and there was something very kind. Of course, I found out about that after the fact, and I'm like, you're going to freak him out. Why did you say that to him?
That's funny.
Luckily, he stuck around, and we made it through. But
I like that. Good story.
Yeah, but it is important to just realize that, like, yeah, and then that was their way of saying, like, she gets to be selfish. This is very important. You need to realize that this is, you've signed up to spend time with this person, and this person is doing something hard, and you need to let her do the hard things. So luckily we made it through, but that always makes me smile when I think about being selfish. It's my parents doing this like intervention with my poor boyfriend who had no idea what he was signing up for. I wanted to talk a little bit about accommodations. You mentioned a high number of neurodivergent students that you work with. And a lot of students do get accommodations, anywhere from a quarter time to double time. And one thing I often hear specifically about the multiple choice is it feels so long when you take these sessions, especially in this, the typical MBE, the 6 hours of testing. If you add, double time, that's huge, right? Even time and a half creates these very long sessions. And for folks, especially anyone who has an attention deficit struggle, that's a long time. It's like you're given extra time, but you're also required to focus for longer. So how do you think that someone who has these longer testing sessions should think about, doing their 100 and their 1,600 questions, as we're talking about, to mimic what they're going to see in the room and practice those muscles of focus to get through this really challenging part of the test, I think, for a lot of neurodivergent students.
Yeah, yeah, that's such an important thing to talk about, especially, the national conference is guarded about their questions. So anytime you have someone with accommodations, there's kind of a heightened no, I don't want to use the word suspicion, but there's a heightened sense of, hey, this is a secure exam, right? So
Right.
the national conference generally has you still do the MBE all in a single day. So it's like, oh my gosh, we're in there for 6 hours without accommodations. Somebody with accommodations, it doesn't generally go into a second day. It just makes it a longer single day, which again, I think heightens the anxiety. So students should study as if they don't have accommodations until they're granted the accommodations. I think that's a very
100%.
important thing. And then once you get them, now start to study the way that the exam is going to be and realize, I when I started teaching, I wanted to talk to like drill instructors because obviously they get a message that's very important to a group, right? Or I wanted to talk to test takers who struggled, failed, and then passed the second time. What was it, right? There's nothing better than going to the source to figure out the problem. And, there comes the solution. I think that the marathon runner doesn't just go out and run a marathon. They start with a mile and then 2 and then 3 and then 4, right? Like I think you have to ramp it up each day. But I don't like students doing questions at midnight, but we have a lot of folks who are like midnight studiers. I get that. My wife is a night owl. I'm an early riser. That works for our schedules, but like the bar is generally between 9 and 5, right? So doing questions, some in the morning, like Monday, do your questions in the morning. Tuesday, do your questions in the afternoon. I think that's a way to build up stamina. It's a way to avoid fatigue. I also think that the more you engage the page physically with your pencil, circling, underlining, highlighting things, obviously that's going to work for current bar. NextGen, it may be a little bit more difficult, but as I've seen, you're still going to have those highlight functions or the cross out functions. So I think you can make online like paper, but engage the page. You go kind of numb to that fact pattern where you're like, I just read those words, but I forgot what they meant, right? And I think that's just a matter of attrition. The more you are doing, and do a set of 30 and then immediately review them and then take a break, look at the phone. But like during that set of 30, put it on your calendar, right? Nothing else should be conflicting with that set of 30 because I want you to go, deep dive into those questions and then see how did you do on them. I think before we started, I was talking a little bit about 2 features that Themis has added to the UWorld QBank. One is showing you that you moved from a wrong answer to a right answer. It kind of says, hey, don't change your answer. Your instinct was right. But then the other one is how much time on average it takes you to get a question right. And you will see that if you're going to get it wrong, whether you spend a minute or 5 minutes, doesn't matter. So it's like, okay, I know this. I feel good about it. I'm choosing this answer in 30 seconds. I just saved myself like a minute, right? Or sitting there thinking about it, A, B, for a minute, it doesn't move the needle, right? And it's like, okay, well, if wasting a minute here isn't going to gain me an extra point, I'm now going to get a question finished that I may not have gotten to. And it's really forcing students to say, hey, even though I don't feel good about this question, it's going to get worse if I don't move on to the next one. Because so many students are bubbling in the last 10. That's just pure guessing, right? Or for some reason, they don't even hear you have 1 minute remaining and they don't bubble in the last 10. And now it's like, wow, you missed 10 opportunities to get a question right. So I think practicing under those time conditions is the most important thing, whether you have accommodations or not. Get used to the exam that you're going to take.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think for those longer sets, if you're doing a 4.5 hour slog for your 100 questions, I think really finding whatever it is that you need to create those mini breaks, right? So it's like, okay, well, I can do 20 and then I have to stretch and then I can do, or close my eyes or so, be this awareness around it while you're studying, I think is so important, especially if you struggle with attention. I like my students to keep a notepad next to their study area. And if you're finding your mind is always wandering at 20 minutes, like write that down so we can come up with a strategy for 20 minutes. I had a student years ago who, when California had a 3-hour performance test, which was really long and grueling in its own way, we were able to eventually find that there were just certain pockets of time that she just, if she kept going, she just kind of lost her path. And we just broke up this 3 hours into lots of these little chunks. She knew she had to take little breathing breaks. She'd go to the bathroom, she'd come back, and then she was able to make it into these manageable pieces. But there has to be a willingness to be aware. And like you said, time where you're just doing this one thing, that's the only way you can become aware, to look at those patterns. You have to give yourself the time to do that. And if you're constantly being pulled away from the work, you're never going to see those patterns. There is nothing wrong with taking a mini break 20 minutes in if that's what you need to pass, because nobody knows how you passed the test. They don't know if you took mini breaks or did breathing exercises or went to the bathroom. Like, nobody knows. They just know if you pass or fail. And there's like an empowerment piece in there that I think sometimes gets lost. We feel like we just have to sit and stare at the page or stare at the computer for 4.5 hours without any breaks. That's not actually how it works.
Yeah.
You have a lot more power over that time than I think a lot of people give themselves credit for.
Yeah. And in studying how effective, like a lot of folks with ADHD didn't kind of read something that helped them get better. They found hacks that worked
Mm-hmm.
for them, and then they just started to kind of work it in, right? And in looking at some of those, knowing that I have a break coming up, so I'm going to take a break at the half hour. I know I'm going to take a break at question number 20. Having that in mind, it gives us a sense of movement,
Mm-hmm.
progress. It gives us a goal to set, and then it gives us that dopamine hit that we're looking for, right? And hey, if you're that student who got up and walked around their chair and then repositioned themselves 4 times, and people are like, boy, that was odd. Okay, you're that odd lawyer that did that, right? Because that
Right.
hack worked and it got you, to the score that you needed. So yeah, I think those things are really important to work in. Personally, when I've taken my bar exams, I would just take a break at an hour. Like
Mm-hmm.
every 33 questions, I would take a break. I usually was ahead of time, right? Because if I don't know it, divine intervention isn't going to work, right? So I know I'm going to put in my guess answer B and I'm going to move on. Maybe I put a little tick beside that and come back to it. But like if I don't know it, it's not going to come to me. I think sometimes a word, a phrase, a rule of law on an essay might come to you. But I think in multiple choice, like you could have the book open. People are like, oh man, why is the MBE closed book? I think you could have the book open, but because it's under time pressure, you could never look it up, right? And it's not
Yeah.
like, what's the missing element of battery here, right? That's not what the questions look like. So the outline, I think, is only useful as you're studying. It would never be useful like as you're taking the exam itself.
Yeah. I mean, because so often you get the question wrong, not because you didn't know the law. It's usually because of the tricky answer choices, the
Yep.
way that the question is presented, the things we do to make these more difficult than they are because there's so much pressure. There are all these other things outside of, what are the elements of battery. That's typically not where the breakdown
Yeah.
happens, right?
And you know what you just said there, which was really important that I think we touched on but didn't go too deep into. It's like when I get it down to two, right? Like how
Mm-hmm.
do I flip a coin? And the answer is absolutely not, right? But when you get it down to two, and more often than not, it's like the two yeses or the two nos. If you get it down to a yes and a no, and usually there it's a rule of law that's going to take you one way or the other, right? But if you get it down to two yeses or two nos, I have kind of three things that I think are important to look at. One is one of them kind of objectively true and the other one like subjectively true? I would pick the subjectively true one, right? Or is one of them more legally accurate, the other one factually accurate? We're taking a legal exam. I like a correct statement of law over a correct statement of fact. If those two don't work, my suggestion is go back and reread the call. Does one of those two more specifically answer the call than the other? And again, I think those three things, you can cycle through those pretty quickly, but ultimately, you got to go through them and then move on to the next question because you don't have this extended time to sit there on that particular question. And in fact, studies show that the longer you take, the less likely it is you're going to get it right.
Yeah. Well, before we wind up, I want to touch on one more thing that's coming as a new gift from the NCBE for the NextGen, which is the 6-option multiple choice question, which is something that most of us have never experienced in the test prep world. And I think that these questions are a bit anxiety inducing. Could you share a little bit about what these 6-question options are and how this is going to show up on this test? And what does it mean for students and how is Themis going to help them prepare for it?
Yeah. So first in NextGen, we have about 120 multiple choice questions, right? So we have three 3-hour sessions, and each one has the integrated sets, the performance test, and then our traditional multiple choice. So 40 multiple choice questions. Of those 40, and the National Conference has released now some sets for us to look at. If you look, the overwhelming majority are the 4 answer choice types, are very standard to what we're seeing. So maybe 10, 15% of those, so not that many, are going to be 6. But my approach of get it down to the yeses or the nos, the predictive outcome, that goes out the window because there's no logic behind the answers, right? Like in property, it wouldn't be yes because he has a power of reverter. No, it would say possibility of reverter, ademption, purchase money mortgage. It just gives you a rule rather than logic behind it. So I think in those, it's about figuring out who you are, meaning your role. Who are you hired by? The plaintiff or the defendant? What's your role? What's your goal? That's been Themis. I've been filming these now for the last couple months, right? Getting ready for, as you said, the rollout. What's your role? What's your goal? Who are you? Who do you represent? And oftentimes in these questions, it will tell you this is what your client wants. Well, then how do I get to my client's goal? If my client wants the property, then my goal isn't to sue for money damages because my client wants the property, right? So I really need to figure out, and that's why I like NextGen in that it is a practitioner's exam. It's not focusing on rote memorization. It's really focusing on strategy and skill. So I think students who went to law school that were involved in any kind of clinic are going to be well served, I think, in preparing for this bar exam. Or if you're on the alternative dispute resolution team or client counseling and negotiation, I think those skills that are going to help you in practice are really going to help you because they're now front and center on the bar. And I think that when you have these 6, you don't have to think about the yeses or the nos as much, but you really need to think about your role and your goal in approaching those. And then I think sometimes it's daunting because it's like, I get it down to 2 and I either get it right or I don't, right? There's no partial credit. But now with the 6, there's partial credit, right? So if there are 2 possible correct answers and you get one of them and you don't get the other one, you still got some partial credit. So that should alleviate a little bit of anxiety as well because you can get now partial credit. But the 6, my approach to those is more know your role and what's your client's goal. Those things are clearly identified in the fact pattern. And I think there are answer choices that don't speak to that. And you really need to be mindful of those. Be looking for the ones that truly meet your client's goal.
And that's just more reason to practice, to to deal with this idea of novelty. This is going to be something new. Your bar provider is going to have questions for you to practice, but you can't put your head in the sand. You have to practice these and give yourself some feedback so you know how to approach them and lean into the partial credit. Who knew? Partial credit on the bar. Let's do it.
Yeah, I
Well,
think I think, NextGen can be daunting, right? Thinking about it. But one, any bar exam is going to be anxiety inducing, right?
Sure.
I think that phrase guinea pig is something I've never liked, but I think people, I don't want to be the guinea pig, so I'm going to take it in a different state. I think you can embrace it because one, it's less memorization, right? Like look at it that way. It's less things to memorize and there's partial credit involved. And frankly, it doesn't benefit the student who can just memorize lots of stuff. It actually benefits the student who is about to go and practice because so much of it is really skills forward focused. So I think that, yes, there's always going to be anxiety around any exam, especially a new one. But I think there are more positives around this than there are negatives.
Yeah. And I think if you are, a 3L, we're recording this in the fall, and you still have one more semester and you've never taken these practical courses, you've never done a clinic or taken an ADR class, or it might be a great opportunity to make sure you get that on your schedule because in a way, especially if the NextGen is coming for you in the summer, or you think you might eventually need to take it, we don't know what reciprocity is going to look like everywhere. It's a different kind of bar prep class and it's really a legal practice class. So it might be a good time to, talk to your registrar and find out what's going to be available so you can fold that into your schedule. Well, Chris, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy teaching schedule to meet with us today. If individuals listening want to learn more about Themis, can you share how they can learn more about Themis's offerings?
Absolutely. Yeah. Just Google it, right? Themisbar.com will take you to kind of our landing page. And from there, you can see all of our products, our 1L, our 2L products, right? Those things to help you while you're in law school. Of course, the ever popular NPRE that everybody needs to take at some point along there. And then you can see not only what we're doing traditionally for the current bar exam, but also all of the things we're doing for NextGen. I'm proud to be part of that team. I've worked at a lot of different bar companies and taught at a lot of different schools. I'm so happy and honored to be part of the Themis team because I really feel like we are making a difference by cutting out a lot of the noise and getting down to business and helping students feel confident in a efficient process and going and making their dreams come true. So that's been great for me. And Lee, thank you so much. It's nice to chat with you about a shared interest.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, and we'll look forward to having you back on the podcast soon.
Look forward to it.
I would like to take one more opportunity to thank Themis Bar Review for sponsoring this podcast. Remember, there is a special promotion for Bar Exam Toolbox listeners. You can save $1,000 on any 2026 Themis Bar Review course using the code BAREXAMTB1000 at checkout, valid through December 1st, 2025. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to give us a like and leave a comment and subscribe so you don't miss any future content. For more information about our bar resources, please check out barexamtoolbox.com.